I'm going to expand my hierarchy of joints here by selecting the end joint, hitting F. Okay. This is where this script kind of kicks ass a little bit. And what I mean is, this process is a little bit arduous and a little bit painful, at least the way I teach it, if you don't use the script. If you do use the script, it's going to be uber easy. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to select the FK joints that we want to set up. The hand joint is the end of the joint chain, so we're not going to have a controller set up for that, bless you. So we're going to start at the wrist here. So I'm just going to select the wrist, and I'm going to choose a controller. I'm going to choose these cubes here, because, like I said, I like how they function for this purpose, even though they're a little bit odd looking. Now, it's going to be in the same place as the IK. For right now, that's sort of all right. But what I do need is for it to be going around this object and easily selectable. So I'm still going to, even after creating it as group 1 here, select the curve. Remember, when you change the scale of things and scale it to size, you select the curve, not the group. If you select the group, you're going to be messing stuff up. Just FYI on that. So I select the curve. I'm going to hit R to get my scale. And basically, I want this controller to sort of be like this IK controller. Easy enough for somebody to select and close enough that we know what it's associated with. So that's looking pretty good to me, but now I got value here, so I'm going to freeze transforms. Kabam. All right. And because I don't want to leave things to the last minute, I'm going to label these. So we're going to call this L, ARM, FK, ORI. Yeah, I'm going to keep it simple for right now. On the fingers, you could actually have 2 orientations above the hierarchy of the controller itself. So in other words, you'll have a controller, and then you'll have a parent that is ORI 1, and then you'll have a parent of that that group parent that'll be ORI 2. The reason for that is that second group can allow you to create a separate functionality for the fingers. We're going to use a simple FK setup. So if you just want to stick with what I'm covering just like this, you only need one of them. But if you also want to have customized channels that are like tip, mid, base of finger kind of thing, where you would select the hand controls and then have a slider, you can use that separate group to have an entirely separate function to handle that. I'll leave that to a little bit later, and I'll cover that if we get to it. If we don't, a simple FK setup will totally cut it. So just FYI on that. Why am I covering it now? Because usually I would call this ORI 1 or ORI 01 if I was going to do that. So, but I'm just going to call this one ORI, and I'm going to move on to the next thing. Now, if you want to keep it simple, you can set up an FK forearm controller. That'll save you a little bit of a headache, but it'll look a little bit hackish. We are going to create a custom condition for our IK setup, though, that creates a dampening on the forearm. We can use that exact same setup for FK. So this is one where you get a choice. If you want to have a straight up, you absolutely have control of the forearm, you can create a controller here if you want. If you want to use the dampening process, just move on to the elbow. Okay? So in this case, I'm going to move on to the elbow. Create another one of these boxes. I'm going to name this one. I'm going to keep with the same naming convention. L, ARM, FK. Oh wait, did I? Oh man. I need to rename the other two. This should be L, elbow, FK, Ori. And this one other one that I did, L arm, FK, I should have called L wrist. Sorry. I didn't name the curve either. Just dropping the ball all over the place here. All right, L wrist, FK, Ori. Copy that title. Go to its curve. This one's going to be control. Cool. That's what we're looking for. All right, L elbow. Man. Control. And I'm going to move on to the shoulder now. Okay, so shoulder. FK, L shoulder. Box again. And L shoulder. FK.
You said always use the box for FK, right?
No. Now it's my choice. If you want to use a different controller, you can. Just make sure it makes sense, right? 'Cause yeah, if you like some of these other shapes better, cool, go for it. Ultimately, all of those shapes is just there for visual clarity, so people can differentiate between an FK setup and an IK setup, you know, an arm and a leg or whatever. It just makes it look clean. Okay, so now I'm going to resize these. So clearly the shoulder's not working out. So I'm going to select the curve, scale it up, get it into place. Now this one, because of the way it's positioned, I may leave that one kind of as a box like that. So I'm going to go on to the to modify freeze transforms. Cool. Let's go to the elbow. Same thing. Scale it up. This time I'm going to shrink that one down a little bit. If you want, you could even use like a longer thing for something to indicate that's this or that's that. In this case, because it's a bending one, I may make it skinnier, just to make it more visually clear. Freeze transforms on that. Okay. So cool. We got our wrist, our elbow, and our shoulder. So the setup of FK is pretty much going to be dependent on orient constraints. But before we get that far, the way that I set up FK constraints, at least for this class, is by creating a hierarchy that mimics what the joints are doing. In which case, every group is going to be parented to its curve further up the line. Group of wrist curve parented to curve. Group of elbow curve parented to curve. Okay? And that'll create a nice clean hierarchy going down. Now the reason for that is because we don't want any kind of inheritance going on between these controllers. So by creating those offsets, we basically have a middleman to take in those values and leave everything else zeroed out for us. So we're good to go. So, the easy way to do this, there's any number of ways to do this, but the way I do it is I select the controller curve just in the window here. I press up on the keyboard, which will highlight the group. I shift select the next curve, and I hit P. Then I select this curve, hit up on the keyboard to get the group, and I shift select the next curve in the hierarchy and hit P to parent it. So essentially what we have now is if I select this controller curve right here, it selects the entire thing. If I move it, it moves the entire arm. If I select this controller curve, it selects its child down the chain. If I select this one, it selects its child down the chain. Ultimately, we know this will work and work well when I can select each individual curve, go to rotation, zero it out, and it goes right back to where it started. If it doesn't do that, you probably don't have group offsets in between in your hierarchy, and you need to fix that. Okay? Okay. once we have a hierarchy that looks like this, and I'm going to show you what this hierarchy looks like in the outliner here. It's basically this bit right here. It should look like these stair steps with a group, a curve, a group, a curve, a group, a curve. Okay? Now in the case of those fingers, what it'll be is group, group, curve, group, group, curve. But it's still going to be this stair-stepping thing. We're not going to have like we have in the arm here where we have these parallel hierarchies. If you have any kind of parallel hierarchies like that, it essentially means that you did it wrong. Okay? All right. So I'm going to turn off polys here to eliminate any further potential for confusion.
Sorry. So you pick the curve first, you hit up, and then you hit the
Shift
group.
select the next curve,
The
and then
next
hit
curve.
P. If you start grouping things, you're going to make a hot mess real fast.
Okay.
All a group is in Maya. Because a group sounds like it's something totally different than nothing, right? But the reality is that's not true. Even if you look at the script of how a group works, what a group is a null. You know what a null is, right? A null is a nothing. A nothing that can have rotation, scale, and translation values. And all a group is a nothing that is the parent of a something. When you hit Control G, it's basically an automated process that says create nothing, parent that object to nothing, or a null. Okay? So all we're doing is we're making sure that the nothing is in between the curves. So that's why I'm selecting the curve, hitting up to get the parent of the curve, the null. I'm parenting the null to the next curve. If I parent it to the other null, it's basically skipping that curve. Okay? And what we're really depending on here is that this hierarchy is like this hierarchy. This is the parent, this is the child. This is the parent, this is the child, etc. Right? Until you get to the littlest child. In this case, it's parent, child, parent, child, parent, child, on down. Right? Okay. So the reason we did that is so that each one of these curves themselves always can zero out back to the thing. If I change the shoulder value somewhere, if I select the next controller down, it's still aligned to that controller, and it's still at 000 on both rotations and translation. Okay, so once you have this setup going, it's going to be just like we did for that IK hand, the IK wrist. We're going to select the controller curve, and then we're going to select the joint associated with it. Once again, if your naming was handled properly, it's very easy because look, it's a wrist controller and it's a wrist joint. So I'm going to select the controller curve, control select the wrist joint, and I'm going to go constrain, orient constrain, option box, maintain offset turned off, add that. If everything went according to plan, nothing gets flipped out or screwed up, right? You may want to do this specific part with your fingers still attached. That way, if something does get screwed up in the wrist, what you'll see is the hand flip upside down or some kind of craziness, indicating something went wrong. After you set that one up, you can delete those fingers because they're no longer useful. Okay? All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. Curve. So in this case, elbow, the control curve. And then I'm going to select the elbow joint. FK, though. Control select elbow joint, parent, child. Constrain, orient, option box, add. Now, if you don't want to keep bringing up that box, the repeat last command in Maya is G. So once you've done this with one curve and one joint, you can go through selecting the curve and the joint and hit G next time to automate that process. For example, controller curve on shoulder, control select FK shoulder, G. Okay? So now, if I grab this shoulder and I move it, you can see the joint chain coming along for the ride. And if I select these joints, and I'm Control-Shift selecting them one by one to make sure I got all of them, and I zero this out, it goes right back on top of all the other joints, back how it goes. Yeah,
Real quick.
sure.
You select the controller on that list. Then you select, for example, the wrist controller.
Are you well, I don't select on the list. You can if you want to, but you want to make sure you're on the curve itself. Yeah.
Okay, so
First.
you select the controller with the curve, then select the FK, whatever it is. So it's your wrist controller,
Then the
FK
joint,
wrist.
because it's parent, child. The FK needs to follow the controller.
And then orient constraint.
Orient constraint, maintain offset turned off. If you've done everything right, everything should already be at 000 on rotation, which means that you don't need an offset. It is already offset because of the way you've created it. If you need an offset, you're adding extra potential problems for yourself. So if you do see some kind of flipping, something may be wrong with your joints, actually, and the way you set them up. Which, incidentally, is why I took so damn long with you guys on joints. Because here's where they become the pain in your backside if they aren't set up correctly. If they are set up correctly, it'll work like this, where you don't see any problems and it looks easy peasy. But this is contingent upon the setup I kept hammering into you guys in that beginning, which is why I took so much damn time. This is what's going to make your character function, right? That's why it snowballs when it goes wrong. It turns into a friggin' nightmare if it isn't done right. Okay, so we have our FK set up and we have our IK set up. Does everybody understand this? Okay, so last bit of business here. Now we need the parent of our entire FK hierarchy, so the ORI of the shoulder. Incidentally, this is why it's a problem. Notice how I moved it and the arm stayed in place? Because it is an orientation constraint. Now we need a system whereby if something gets moved in the skeleton, it comes along. So we're going to select the shoulder controller, hit up on the keyboard to get that orientation, and we're going to parent it, once again, just like the shoulder, we're going to parent it to the clavicle. So I'm going to go to the base clavicle right here, control select it, and hit P. So now, if I move this joint chain, my FK comes along for the ride. Now IK doesn't quite work this way. So if your IK stuff is hanging back like that, that's okay. That's how it's going to function on our rig. Okay? Same thing with the feet. But FK, it needs to be tied into the hierarchy or it's not going to function. Yeah?
Can you repeat that again?
Sure. Okay, so we have this setup, right? Which is essentially a hierarchy. It's kind of like our joint chain, except in this case, the lowest on the totem pole isn't going to be this joint, right? It's going to be this curve. So let me go over to my outliner and hit F. This is the hierarchy of my controller setup, right? Child, parent, child, parent, child, parent. This right here, this shoulder FK ORI, is the senior most parent. Now, right now, it exists in the root of the world. It has no parent. It is the cock of the walk. Okay? But what we want is we want it to follow along with our joint setup so that it stays intact, stays in place. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that FK parent, shoulder ORI, and we are going to parent it to the same place that all of our duplicate joint chains are tied in, which in our case is the clavicle. So you're going to select the L shoulder FK ORI, and the way I did it over here was the same way I did these. I just selected the controller curve and I hit up. If you feel more comfortable selecting the L liner, you can just select it here. And I'm going to tie it into the base joint chain, the one that doesn't have IK or FK. I'm going to tie it into the clavicle, which is essentially the parent of all this mess. So control click clavicle, and I'm going to hit P to parent. Because in parenting, it's child to parent. Right? Make sense? It's a lot though, right? We have more.
Next week.
if you guys have this and can implement it, yeah, I will let you go with this and start working on it. Does anybody have any questions about either of these systems here? Because we're going to have to roll on after this.
So for the limbs, basically, you just want IK. But for like FK, is that just for spine
And fingers.
and fingers? Okay.
Which, okay, so, and if I were you, my logical question to me would be, wait. I did do that face too. I'd go, wait. I understand the arm because I had an L shoulder FK Ori and I understood it's tied into the clavicle, but in the case of the spine, I don't have a clavicle to tie it into. Where would I tie it into?
The root? Oh, yeah, the root.
And the answer is going to be the parent of the spine, which in that case is the root.
Yeah.
So it's going to be the same thing with a... actually, the head control is going to be tied into the spine because the spine is the parent of the head control.
So we'll be doing that with everything else.
Pretty much, except for the feet. Except for the feet.
Oh,
So, actually, that's not true, because the foot setup I'm going to do is IK. Yeah, you're going to do it for the feet too. I contradict myself. So yeah, you're going to do it all the way down to the toe. Yeah, and then next week we're going to cover the foot setup and probably the switch. And if we get through those seamlessly, we may also cover the face controls. If we can't get to that, I'll put it off to that second to last week. I'm going to make a UI for you guys for the face controls, and I'm going to show you how I did it on week 10 so that you guys don't have to. Typically what I do, though, is I have you guys create your own visual UI, your graphical user interface, which is essentially just a bunch of NURBS curves that are visually appealing and make sense when you look at them, right? In my case, I'm going to create an incredibly simple one for you guys. And that way you don't have to. But I'll make sure you guys understand the process I took to get there. And that's how we'll win back some of our time. But yeah, so the fingers, so you got the spine thing, yeah? So let me ask you this. I think you got that under control. What do you do for the fingers? Let's say I got an index finger that's set up like this arm. Where does the parent group of that index finger set of FK controls get tied in?
Yeah.
You guys are awesome. So I suddenly feel a wave of relief over me because you guys are answering your own questions, which is friggin' awesome. Or at least you're answering the questions I would have if I were you, which is also friggin' awesome. Okay. Any questions on, okay?
And you do nothing between the hand and the wrist?
Can you flex the middle of your hand?
I guess not.
It's there as an endpoint.
Okay.
I guess you could say, well, if I squish it just right. If you really want to be that guy. But then again, you also have that knuckle there, which is essentially what allows you to do that, right? Up here, these are just a group of bones that hang out and allow you to back fist people like Bruce Lee.
If I like make this kind of thing with my hand, it feels like I'm exerting pressure to the center of my hand.
And that's because the fat is pushing against the center of your hand. Sexy, right?
Kind of flexing.
So I got a last question.
He's determined that it's the last question for all the rest of you.
Everybody
Sorry, he
is.
called it. After he asked it, you're done. Go ahead.
It might be a stupid one, but
No, there's no stupid questions. There's only redundant ones.
That's a lie.
you did have to
Redundant ones.
you did have to duplicate the base joint 2 times, right? For the IK and the FK.
Yeah, from the shoulder, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's going to be the same thing with the hip. Like, the base for the hip is going to be right there, right?
Yeah.
Essentially your thigh. And you're going to be duplicating that. And those are all going to tie into the pelvis so that they all move with the pelvis. And that way you don't have to create a separate IK and an FK pelvis, right? Logic. All right. Any other questions about FK? Music. Any questions about IK? I'm kind of impressed if that's the case. I'm not sure I fully believe it.
Well, it's like I said last time, sometimes you have questions when you run into an issue or
Okay.
you get like one tiny step while you're working on, and you're like, oh crap, like why is this not working?
So now, since I'm kind of having a hard time believing, I'm gonna ask you like this: did I cover any questions you might have had with IK when I went through it again? Because I noticed some of you were like, "Arr."
No, I remember I redid it, but I now know why I messed up. It was me.
That sounds like a very long-winded yes. What were you gonna ask?
So like, it's kind of small that you probably answered it.
Sorry.
Like, you'd probably answered it when you did it, and I probably missed it.
That's
but,
fine. So what's going
So
on?
like, you know how when you began to put the IK controller on and you like duplicated the joint chain, do you keep that duplicate that you made the controller on?
You mean the joints?
Yeah, from the original that you duplicated from, like, will you, like,
Do you keep the duplicate joints?
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Because, you know, I'm going to jump ahead just temporarily here, just to show you why.
okay.
Okay? And I'm going to cover this next week, so if you remember nothing else, just remember FK setup and IK setup, okay? FK setup, IK setup. This part, I will cover it again.
Okay,
Don't
I thought
panic.
you had gone
So I'm
over
gonna go
it and
quickly.
I missed.
But I'm going to explain this to you like this. Essentially, the way that this setup is going to work is once you have your IK and your FK stuff hanging out and functioning, you have these three joints, right? What we're going to do is we are going to constrain our base joint to both. So, constrain, orient, maintain offset turned off, add. Bam! It snapped over here. Doesn't look like it did because it has basically adapted to exactly what this shape is right over here. But let me illustrate. IK, and now we're going to go to base. I'm going to hit G just to repeat last command. Okay, now the next one. G, 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 G. Now, this is, once again, why naming is so important. Here are the constraints on my base skeleton. If I click on one of them, notice it has FKL wrist and IKL wrist. Imagine that. Now I don't have to guess which is which. Okay. If I go into this constraint and I turn off FK, 0, and I do that on all of these, 0, 0, 0, my base joints have now adopted IK. Wherever my IK moves, my base joints go. If I go back here and I switch it, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, oops, 10, okay, no, 1, 0. It's now going to be following. It's now going to be following my FK. And if you need verification of this, what I'll do is I'll just drag a selection over the joints. L shoulder, FKL shoulder. Our switch is going to take these constraints and tell it which one it should be looking at any given time.
Whichever one you're not wanting to use.
So essentially, when it's if it's an IK-FK switch, the way I explain it is this. If it is an IK-FK switch, and we count 0 to 1, logically, 0 should be IK, and 1 should be FK, which means that when that custom attribute we're going to be creating is at 0, it'll default to IK. When you drag it to 1, it'll blend to FK. And because of the way we've set up this arm, if it was at 0.5, it'll be dead set in the middle. And that's why we're creating these duplicate joint chains, because although our geometry is only following our base joints, because our base joints are following these controlled joints, it now knows which system to adhere to. So that's, in a nutshell, what we're going to be covering next week.
Okay.
with a little bit more complexity. So I hope that explains to you why we have the duplicate joints and why they're set up the way they are. Yeah? A little bit? Yeah?
Yes.
You don't have to raise your hand, man. I mean, I respect the fact you do, but
Well, you're fixing the adding one element.
it's okay. All right? It's okay.
So what other days are you here?
Tuesday, I'm here Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Tuesday, I'm here from 1 to 5 in this classroom, and I'm in 302 from 6 to 10 because I sit in on Brent's programming class and generally crack jokes and pester him.
So Tuesdays and when? What other day?
He's a good guy, what can I say? So Tuesdays 1 to 5 this classroom, and 6 to 10. Actually, technically I'm here 1 to 6 because I sit that hour out in here too, and generally shoot the breeze with Colin, who teaches after me.
Yeah.
And then I sit in on Brent's class because he's covering Python, and it's kind of awesome. Right? If anybody asks me for help in his class, I don't have any trouble with it. We'll call that office time. I'm happy to help people when I'm here. Okay? It's not really office time. But if I did have office time, it would be in Brent's class that he's disturbed, not me. And I'm here today from 1 to 10. So if you want to catch me in my class before this, you can. It's the same classroom here too. Pretty much I live in this classroom, in the one with the devil computers. Incidentally, in my last class, somebody from IT, who I've never seen before, came in and said, "So you're having a problem with this computer?" And it was the one I've been monitoring for quarters.
This one that's not here.
That one? He said, "I have to take this one away." Supposedly, he's fixed the one next to you, Mark. If you can believe it, I'm not sure I would. If you can believe it, that one's fixed. This bank of computers were essentially just unplugged behind the desk. So these all turn on now too.
Someone's just being a jerk.
I guess. I suppose, but it was like somewhere all like deep in there. It was like essentially somebody had whacked the desk and it came unplugged at the little wrapped up wire bit. Nice. So they got to like climb in there and fix that. It's awesome. So it wasn't
Well, you
me.
didn't take them for the.
No, but it was funny though because he was sitting over here and he was fixing that computer, and as I'm like lecturing animation, I see him looking over like he's taking notes. I'm like, "I'm not grading you," you know. It's kind of funny though because he was totally into it. I guess maybe IT wasn't his calling. I don't know, but I'm thinking maybe he's a latent animator waiting to happen. Maybe, hypothetically. All right, so if you guys don't have any more questions, we'll just call that a wrap. If you guys want to get started on any of this, I'll be here in case you want to, catch me for any help with anything. Yeah.
Because
I'm just gonna.
every time like
I'm gonna work on something too because I
This is-
cannot
Oh,
focus
yeah,
right
okay.
now.
I think it's just this computer.
Let me just get the
Because,
lights on.
I select rotate right,
Yeah, yeah, I
Just
saw
go
it.
Or
Like a couple of
around.
times.
and like over here and mess with it.
So, if you just
Only fine.
sign your soul.
Yeah.
Man,
see,
if I could
but look at
interact with
this.
people's souls,
They're
I really
mine.
would be a devil.
Every time I like go like here, error.
Like, what are you doing with their soul? I don't know. It was there.
I don't know, just turning around.